On this episode of Game Shack, I review AtGames Atari Flashback 12 Gold. I'm going to compare it to some of the other things like the 2600 Plus and the Atari Pro. I'm going to ask if this thing has good value for money and if it's something you should pick up this Christmas season. All that and more coming up next. Hey everybody, welcome on back to the Game Shack. I am your host JDV for Evil Genius Entertainment. Thanks for stopping by. As always, you guys are this station's or channel's primary sponsors, so if you can please give me a thumbs up on the way out the door, it really does help the channel. And please subscribe and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. All right off the bat, I'm gonna tell you guys that I got sent this guy, well, the whole package from AtGames to review. They have not made me paid me any money. They haven't made me send them the video to OK or any kind of things like that. I have a lot of skin in the game. I bought every other AtGame product I've ever had. So thanks to AtGames for sending this to me. However, my opinions are my own, and as you'll see, I do have some negative things to say about it. But let's get into what comes in the package to start out with. Right off the bat, this thing comes with everything that you're going to need to play right out of the box. It comes handsomely packaged, I think. Nice little thing to have if you were giving it to somebody or if you received it as a Christmas gift, birthday gift, something like that. Comes with 2 joysticks, comes with a pair of paddle controllers, power supply, HDMI, and the cute as a button little gizmo thing here. You can see right now that it isn't actually much bigger than an Atari cartridge. You can see it compared to the Atari, my OG Atari 2600. See how small it is. In fact, it's so small, if you ever got tired of playing it, you could use it as a Christmas ornament in your tree because it really is that small. It weighs almost nothing. The controller weighs as much as it does. It really is an amazing little bit of technology. The coolest thing about this thing, really, in a way, is that it does have these cool actual physical buttons, and that is actually a really important thing to me, to be able to flip those buttons. That is a really cool thing. Just like the original Atari, it's got all of the inputs in the back, and of course that is a bad idea. Wish the controller inputs were in the front of the machine. That way you don't have to do the invariable spin around type deal. But the good news is that everything you need to play this game comes included in that HDMI cord. So that is actually really good if you're giving this to maybe someone who doesn't have a lot of extra AV cords, power cords, things like that. The other thing that this thing comes with are 130 included games, and a lot of those are A-list Atari games. I wrote a couple of them down. You get Asteroids, Adventure, Combat, Breakout, Super Breakout, Centipede, Demon Attack, Freeway, Hero, Dragonfire, Enduro, Frostbite, which is a great game, Haunted House, Jungle Hunt, another great game, Kaboom, Millipede, Mystical Man, Keystone Capers, Pitfall 1 and 2, River Raid 1 and 2, Robot Tank, Space Invaders, that is not OG, it's like a fake one, but anyway, Space Invaders, Robot Tank, Spider Fighter, Warlords, and Yar's Revenge are all some of the titles that you're going to get. Those are all A-list Atari games and something that is going to satisfy most people when they plug this thing in. Some of the games it doesn't have, though, that you might be interested in getting are E.T., Donkey Kong, Berserk, Frogger, Defender, Battlezone, any of the Star Wars games, and any of the Pac-Man games. So there's no Pac-Man games at all of any kind on here, nor are there any Star Wars games, and that is kind of a big miss. However, one of the coolest things about this machine is if you pick up a little dongle for $7 from Amazon, you can put in an SD card reader, and if you have Atari ROMs on there, it will recognize it as long as you have in the folder listed as game. And I tried it out, and sure enough, it sees it immediately. You just scroll down to the bottom of the screen, and there it says right there, and bam, you click into it. So basically, you can download any ROM you want to off the internet. There are 1,000 places that have these ROMs, and you can put them all on a relatively small SD card, and it'll see them and read and play them. So you can play everything from the games I just mentioned that didn't have me to everything up to Custer's Revenge if you want to go that route. So that is a really cool thing. Now, it does not have an included SD card reader, USB reader, or Wi-Fi, and that is a negative on this thing. I'm going to explain why in a second. In theory, could have any 2600 game ever made relatively easy. But if you don't feel like messing with that, it does come with a very good list of games. I am a little disappointed that there's no Ms. Pac-Man or Junior Pac-Man or heck, even Original Pac-Man, just to enjoy the awfulness of that game. There are a couple of home brews and other things like that on there. However, nothing that's spectacular. So you're not getting the 4K or 8K Pac-Man, nothing like that. But again, you can get all those if you sideload them onto an SD card. Let's talk a little bit about the controller. On one controller, you're going to have a lot of buttons that will take you back to the menu, start the game, rewind, other kind of things like that. The other controller is just a plain controller. In terms of the size and feel of these controllers, it's almost exactly the same size as the OG controller, but you can see right here, the original controller is a little bigger, although it's not quite as thick, I guess, to have all those little buttons on there. But anyway, close enough that it really will make no difference unless you're an absolute purist. One good thing to note is that if you do have original Atari paddles or joysticks, it will work on this. I tried out my OG paddles and joystick, it worked just fine. Of course, you're going to have problems if you need to rewind or anything. So if you have the kind of the joystick that comes with all the buttons in it and then an OG joystick, you're good to go. Now, one thing to note about these controllers, they're actually pretty good. I was actually very surprised at how good they were in the hand. Now, they don't feel exactly like the original controller. The original controller is much stiffer. That's in part because of the way that it recognizes when you go up, down, left, right. There's little button things that you depress when you're moving that joystick. They're not in this version, which is why I think it's a little softer, but you get used to it very quickly. And in fact, I found those controllers to be shockingly good in terms of their response time, except for the paddle control. And there's nothing actually wrong with the paddle controllers or your OG paddle controllers, but there is a little bit of a flaw in the programming in this machine, in that when you turn the dial, it's going to overreact to the left or right, and it's not linear, so it's not moving all the way across the screen in a nice even fashion. It tends to want to jump. Now, you can download a firmware from that to fix that, which apparently does do a very good job from AtGames website. I tried doing it for like almost 2 hours and I could not get it to work. However, that doesn't mean you can't get it to work, and I hope to one day get it to work. Anyway, if you want to try to fix that controller, I would highly advise you go and see John Wagner's video on that. He has a spectacular video on that, and he also has a web page to walk you through. It worked for him. It didn't work for me. I mean, I'll get to my negatives in a second, but that is kind of a bummer. So it isn't that the paddle controllers don't work at all. They do work. It's just that they're going to be a little uneven. You can probably get away with it using the controllers for something like Warlords. However, something like Kaboom that requires a lot more finesse, there's just no way you become very frustrated with it. One other thing to note is that you can actually use this in your ALU. If you have an AtGames Legends, you can plug this thing in using a small HDMI cord and a little USB, and it will recognize the machine and pops right up and you can play it. And of course, the joystick on your ALU is going to be vastly better than the joystick that comes with this. However, it did not recognize the spinners at all. That is a disappointment for me. I really do wish that AtGames had integrated somehow the spinners into this to, kind of act like the paddles. Now, it will let you use the joystick, however, to go back and forth. And for some games, that's actually going to be a benefit. Like in Night Driver, it works pretty good. But again, for something like Kaboom, it does not react fast enough. So I hope that is something that they fix in the future. And frankly, I do hope that that is something that they fix in the 13th edition of this, where you don't have to try to download something to fix those paddles, because again, a lot of people just aren't going to mess with that, and or like myself, aren't going to have great success implementing it in the first place. So your mileage might vary depending on how badly you want to play those games with the paddles. So let me just sum up some of the negatives of this, and I'll get to the list of positives, which way outweighs the negatives. But basically, you cannot change the aspect ratio. It has no built-in USB or SD card reader, does not have Wi-Fi. So if you do want to do something like a firmware, you got to get that little extra dongle thing. Same thing for side loading games on it. It is missing some key games like the Pac-Man and Star Wars games, but nice to have those on there. And of course, the paddles aren't going to work super great right out of the box. Again, that's something you can fix. One other thing about this that is probably going to be a negative for most people is that the cords for both the paddles and the joysticks are way too short. Now, in point of fact, they are actually exactly as long as the original paddle or joystick controllers were. So you say, well, okay, but those were too short too. And then back in the day, you'd be expected to sit down in front of your TV, which was going to be a lot smaller than whatever you're rocking right now. And when it's one thing if you're 9 or 10 years old trying to play this sitting in front of the TV. It's another thing if you're in your 40s or 50s trying to do it. So there is a workaround. You can get controller extenders off of Amazon for I think $8, something like that. And that gives you, I think, like 8 foot extra. You can of course use a longer HDMI cord and just have the power source be plugged in a little closer to you. So let me talk a little bit about the differences between this. So this Flashback Gold is one of those kind of one-stop shop. It's going to give you all those Atari games that you want, and it's super easy to add more Atari. However, you are not going to play anything else other than 2600 games on here. So you won't be able to hack in Sega Genesis, Nintendo, Atari 5200 or 7800 games. That's just not going to work on here. That will work, however, on the Atari Pro. That thing will play right out of the blocks, 5600 and 7200 games. It also has a variety of other games like from Pico and other type games. You can sideload Genesis and Nintendo games on that. So it's kind of shifts that thing over to more like almost like a Raspberry Pi, as opposed to this game, which is kind of just Atari. And the Atari 2600 Plus will only play Atari cartridges. So that is more for somebody like an established owner of old Atari games that has a bunch of those cartridges, maybe has the paddle controllers and some of the other things, or someone looking to get into collecting that kind of stuff. So really kind of apples and oranges. So which one should you get? Well, if you want the OG type controller and you want a whole bunch of games built in, then it's this AtGames. It really is the only choice. If you did want the OG controller and a cartridge, then your only real choice is the 2600 Plus. And if you want to use a more modern controller that uses USB input, so you could use your Xbox One or PlayStation 4 or 5 controller, then it's the Atari Pro. That would be the way to go in there. Almost every single person says about that Atari Pro that the joystick, while it looks good and everything, is not super conducive to playing those games, that almost everybody wants to end up using their Xbox or PlayStation controller for that. In terms of the Atari Gold that I'm reviewing now, again, those controllers were very smooth, very slick, but again, you are going to be limited to that. Now, I'll say this, I could not find my original Sega Genesis controller, which does work on the 2600. I don't know if it's going to work on here. I do know that the AtGames Sega Genesis Flashback controller did not work on it, so for whatever that's worth. So bottom line is, if you get this thing, you're going to be stuck with some form of Atari input controller. There's no real way around that. Same thing with the Atari 2600 Plus. However, the Atari Pro, again, you're going to be able to use those USB style controllers. So anyway, so this is a solid B for me. It's definitely something that if you want to buy somebody a nice present this Christmas and keep it under $100, this is the way to go to me. I am very curious about the Atari Pro. I am probably going to pick that up and do a direct comparison. However, it is a little bit apples and oranges in that you're not getting original joysticks or paddles at all. The little knob is on the controllers for that Atari Pro. And it plays 7,800 games, and it potentially everything from Nintendo to Sega Genesis games. So again, it isn't quite the same product. Same thing for the 2600 Plus. That is only going to rock cartridges and is essentially just a normal Atari 2600 with an HDMI out. All right, well, I hope this review helped make up your mind whether or not this is something you want to pick up. I do think it is absolutely a good buy if you want a one-stop shop to give somebody an Atari this Christmas. All right, so give me a thumbs up on the way out the door. It really does help the channel. Love each other, and until next time, I'll see you in the Game Shack. Isn't it so cute? So cute. Mwah! See you later.
Be sure to visit evilgeniusentertainment.com for exclusive content, swag, casting call news, and much, much more.